Well, let's talk about our next assignment. Now that you have all this great theory and understanding under your belt of how lighting works, now we're going to start with something small, something ready-made, which is a custom luminaire design for a past project. And first of all, let me just describe the assignment. It will be a single luminaire, or it can be a lighting effect. I'll leave it entirely up to you and whatever your past design might have been. And we're going to present this as a linear presentation, so several slides in PowerPoint, and it will have to be narrated, I'm afraid, so you will have to figure out how to narrate your presentation, although I suspect you have already figured that out because you all successfully did it in a different class. And the presentation should include ideas and inspirations. And again, I'm encouraging you to use a past project. And in fact, the earlier on in your career here at Endicott, the better, because it's less likely that you will have developed some more sophisticated lighting ideas. Or you can take a project where maybe you had some idea for a custom luminaire and maybe you even sketched it out, but now you can really develop it so that you can make it more realistic, as if you were going to really build this project. So that means that you will have both a design drawing, kind of sketches and concepts, also a rendered image of the light fixture or lighting effect, and also titles and all that kind of stuff, so we know what's going on. But you'll be talking, so that's not as critical. But then I'm going to have you do some detailed drawings, a plan and section, and the visible elevations of the fixture. So as I mentioned, start with a past project. That's probably the best way to go, and preferably this would be something other than just a simple cove or slot or something like that. I am thinking more likely a decorative light fixture or a decorative lighting experience or built-in lighting effect. And you'll have to think through a number of different things as the process goes. And of course, I will grade you on your design, including how thoughtful it is, how appropriate it is to your project. So you will need to explain whatever concept, if it's based on growth or filtration, or I don't know, all those fun concepts that everyone comes up with. You will have to provide some sort of information. If you decide you hate all of your past projects, none of them have any lighting, and you don't want to revisit any of them, you can start fresh with some other project. Maybe it's your basement at your house or maybe whatever. But either way, you will need some sort of concept in order to develop the light fixture, because that's part of how I'm going to grade you, is how well your fixture stems from its concept. So let's talk a little bit about some of these decorative fixtures. And of course, we've talked about them in lectures, both the fixtures themselves that are sort of wonderful, sparkly objects that draw your attention, but also lighting effects, things which occur in a space. There's all sorts of examples of lighting which is itself not drawing attention to the object, to the luminaire, but instead is some kind of effect, either changes in color or highlighting different elements. So obviously for us, you have to start with some kind of sketch, right? So if your sketch is a bowl of grapes, you have to come up with some kind of fixture that is going to bring that bowl of grapes into a three-dimensional glowing reality. And you're all very familiar to this, but I would definitely recommend starting with some kind of sketch, and either on the computer or by hand, whichever is your favorite method. But then think about the structure. For example, how does this light fixture hold itself up if you're looking at some 400-pound blown glass fixture? You can't just hang that off of a piece of drywall. You're now at the point where you have taken the construction and material sequence all the way up through this one, and probably, I believe, the construction and materials 4 class. So you probably have a pretty good sense of how, for example, ceilings are put together. How are you going to hang that fixture? How are you going to work around the finishes? We often think, oh, I'm going to have a wood ceiling. Great. All right. Well, how does this light fixture fit into the ceiling if it's recessed or if it's hanging from the ceiling? What happens when the wire gets to the ceiling? Usually there's some kind of plate up there called an escutcheon. What kind of escutcheon do you want? And again, I think if you look at the decorative fixtures that I've shown in past lectures, most of them have resolved, or all of them pretty much have resolved these issues. How do they interface with the ceiling? How high are they mounted? Relative to human viewers. And when you render these, you will want to show escutcheons, wires, obviously a glowing light source, and it's absolutely critical that you show a person, at least one person, in the space so we know how big it is. And of course, I'm encouraging you to use a past design because then you'll have the context already there so that we can see it. So let's actually look at some of the details here. I've posted some examples to Canvas. These are from the Springs class, so you probably know the students. But anyway, they were also for a design competition, which we won't be doing because it's already over. However, she came up with a light, this particular student, where the lights kind of snap together and they have a interesting interactive thing. And she really did a nice job. You can see how this is a front section and a side section because in this case, the fixture was shaped in such a manner that the sections were different from left to right. And she really worked through the location of all the elements that make the thing work. All the light sources, including LED strips, and also a plastic casing that glows. Okay. And she showed it in a number of situations. In this case, they were not using a past project, so they had to come up with a situation that was part of the criteria for this particular project. But and she actually came up with a box for it because I guess she had an idea of how it would be marketed. Same with this student. She had a concept. This one, they weren't able to, they can present using their voice in class, but because it was a competition, they had to really thoroughly explain their concept on the board. I'm not usually so excited about so much information on the board, but you can see here that she's rendered it such that you can see how it lights up. There's even an escutcheon pictured here, a lamp, which I'm not actually sure is the right lamp for this one. And has rendered it in great detail, and then also developed a section drawing, including the gypsum wallboard assembly, the suspension rod, what it's made out of, what its finishes are, and even the lamp specifications. Now, with us and most light fixtures nowadays, they're going to be LED and not have a sort of screw-in lamp like we used to have, unless your design really requires that particular element. So there's a couple things, a kind of checklist of stuff you'll need to work out as you develop your design. First of all, where is it and how is it mounted? Wall mounted, ceiling mounted, recessed, surface mounted. How is the fixture supported? What are the finishes around it? And again, these are things probably you've resolved in your studio design, but you may not have thought about how all the interfaces might go. Finally, the light source. Is it LED? Probably. But its output characteristics. Is it an uplight, a downlight? Remember, LEDs are particular in that they are omnidirectional. They only go one way. So if you have a recessed fixture, something custom where the LEDs are part of it, you'll have to think about that. Whereas if you have a screw-in lamp, a light bulb, you're going to need to provide some kind of socket, a base for it, and the wiring, and of course switching. How is this thing turned on and off? It's actually quite common to have things switched remotely. That's the term you use when you have a fixture mounted, say, on a ceiling, but you turn it on and off at some distant location. But it's also fine to have switches mounted on the fixture. And for these types, this type of information, like I mentioned, you're going to need a section, but you'll also want to go through as you draw the section. Usually you'll discover, oh, wait, where do those wires go? And how do they how do they attach to the fixture? How do they snake through these glass rods or whatever? Do you want to see the wires or not? You do unfortunately have to have wires. So anyway, these section drawings are the ones where we really work all that out. And initially, you're going to just want to think about, all right, where is this fixture? How is it mounted? What are the cutoff angles and lines of sight and all that kind of thing? What's it going to do? And these types of drawings, these are simple drawings that do discuss the mounting. You can see some fixtures are recessed, some fixtures are surface mounted. This is a great start. But then, getting into the details of how the whole thing is put together is going to be a challenge. Most of you, hopefully, will remember from construction and materials for contract documents that your projects are made of stuff, typically wood or metal studs, and so you're going to have to think about, well, how am I going to hang that fixture off of the wall or off of the ceiling? Or off of a ceiling grid, although most of the time we're not designing custom luminaires that go into these ceiling grid systems. However, if they are, by all means, that's fine, but you'll, again, want to look at the details of the grid system or of a unistrut system or a fixed metal stud type of ceiling system. So, and of course, there is no level of detail which is too detailed for all of us, but in particular, those elements which control the lighting, including baffles and lenses and reflectors, those sorts of things. If you're going to have those, how are they going to be held in place? We can't use glue for everything. And of course, what are the actual materials? This is the kind of literally nuts and bolts of our design, but I think it's also where kind of the richness of the design can come out. There's a difference between polished aluminum and brushed aluminum, or aluminum that is brushed using different grits of brush. It really can make a big difference how you approach these, or glass or plexiglass, wire, all that kind of stuff. All that is specified and should be specified. Also, the hanging materials, we often just say, well, I'll just make it a metal rod. Is that really as good as we can get? Well, a lot of light fixtures use what's depicted on the upper left, these sort of threaded rods. But then we cover up those rods with other things that are meant to make it look nice, but the threaded rod is kind of the structural piece. In fact, this one here in the middle, this is actually what if you go and you look at the lamp by your bedside, that is probably what it uses. The whole thing kind of just screws together, and the wires go through these hollow rods. They snake through to the base where the plug comes in, if it's a desk lamp. So the other thing to consider is, are the lamps a lamp, or are they LED emitters that are just sort of mounted on something? And if they are just sort of mounted on something, remember that they have to be, they are unidirectional, not omnidirectional, excuse me. So they only throw light in one direction, which means they'll be dark on one side. And that side is typically made of metal, so it reduces heat a bit, but also so that the LEDs can be affixed in a permanent and secure manner. So, but there are other kinds of light sources out there that we have learned about, including fun things like fiber optics. All of these, we can have a color temperature and what color the light is, or it can change. And you'll want to consider, how many lumens is this thing going to put out? What sort of light fixture? If it's meant for a lobby of a hotel that has 40-foot ceilings and the fixture is 12 feet high, it's probably going to throw out an awful lot of light, maybe 5,000 lumens. If it's meant for a dining room, it probably is going to be more in the 75 to 200 lumen range, just depending on the effect you're going for. So, and if you do use the old school screw-in lamp, remember, everything has a dimension. So, and these are known dimensions. They're easy enough to look up, and you can look at them right here. But LEDs are really the way to go. And typically what happens with LEDs, I mean, you can buy these kind of cables at Home Depot, either like this or like this, and they can be cut. And then the driver for the LED is adjusted to match the number of emitters that there are in these. And you can see here the width of these ribbons can be 3/8 of an inch by 1/16 of an inch thick. They're pretty easy, and they come in so many different configurations just depending on how much light you want. These are usually described as lumen output per linear foot. So if you're lighting a cove, for example, you might want 50 lumens per linear foot, depending on the size of the cove, or it might be 10, or it might be 100. It just depends on how big the cove is. Anyway, they typically snap into these kind of aluminum or metal or plastic extrusions, depending on if you want something rigid or not. And often there are these kind of snap-on. It's not really a reflector. It's more just like a housing cover that covers the LED that's inside this kind of ribbon here. So the detail drawings that I'm hoping you will draw will obviously be to scale. These are construction type of drawings. Usually we draft them with lines in Revit, because Revit, you don't model this kind of level of detail. So when you model your design, when you've come up with a design and created it, you're going to draw a section. The section basically will be detail lines, just because there's no way to model all the bits and pieces in Revit. Or there is, but you'll spend the rest of your life doing it. So, but obviously use your proper detailing conventions, dark lines for objects that are cut through, light lines for things that are in the distance. And you should use a junction box, and if there is a lamp, and the base should be to the correct size. And you can go onto something like lamps.com and find a million different sized lamps if you're looking for something that fits into a very specific spot. So finally, blocking, all those sorts of things are very important. So here's some examples. These are actually just a manufacturer's drawing. So they don't have all the information about the finish materials and all that, but you can see here this one is good because it indicates the recessing heights, the overall dimensions of the fixture. This is an example of a fixture where they can have 1, 2, 3, or even 4 of these lamps in the fixture, just depending on which one you order. It's from good old Lightolier. And it also indicates that the fixtures can swivel, which is kind of a cool feature. Again, when you design something custom, there may be any number of features that you're looking for, including can it move? So, and here are also some good lighting examples. In this case, it's a full-on construction detail where they have indicated what appears to be some kind of soffit up above a kitchen counter. There's a light hanging from it, which they have indicated going through the ceiling. And you can see here they've even included the escutcheon. These are blocking pieces here. So they've done a good job of labeling all the pieces. Although, in all honesty, I'm not entirely sure I understand what's going on here. But it looks to me like it's a kind of old style molded sort of thing, a Smoot SM38 crown molding. Anyway, and they've even provided a reflected ceiling plan. Notice how in the reflected ceiling plan they've shown lightly what the floor plan arrangement is. This is actually a nice way to detail something, because you often are sort of designing with the furniture arrangement in mind, but you don't always see the furniture arrangement in ceiling plan. So, and what drawings to show? Well, by all means, show all the drawings you need, I guess is the rule of thumb. In this case, we really do need to see more than one section. This is kind of the overall section with eye height indicated, but then we need a more detailed section just because we can't really understand how all the pieces fit together until we see that greater level of detail. So one other fun thing to consider, and again, we're not building this fixture, unfortunately, this summer. That's something we often do with the in-person class. But where do those darn wires go? It is forever the issue that students struggle with. But sometimes you're also, if you're using a fiber optic light source, it has a light engine, and that engine is located remotely, but you still have to snake the fiber optic strands somehow through the fixture. And the whole kit and caboodle does connect to a junction box. For LEDs, there is a driver. So even if you have some totally custom, funky shaped light fixture, you do have to have a driver somewhere, typically up in the junction box or around the junction box. So, and let's just take a look at some standard fixtures to see how they're wired. Here is a recessed can, boring old recessed can. This is the LED right here. This whole thing here is actually a heat sink. So the housing above it is air that allows the heat to escape. So basically this thing, there's a wire that comes from here to a junction box, which is on the outside of the fixture. And then the wires go from the junction box back to home. When you do what's called remotely switching a fixture, you draw this little arrow here. It's called a home run. And it just indicates that wire goes somewhere, but it's outside of the drawing. And here's the, I guess, plan view, bottom view, which is the kind of puck-shaped light source, the LED heatsink. Above it, a wire goes to the junction box. That junction box is this box here. And then it goes away, goes home. Okay, this is an energy-saving premium T8 light, another recessed light. This is fluorescent, or actually probably LED, I think, if I remember correctly. But either way, the light goes from the end of the lamps, again, to a junction box. In this case, it's hidden in the middle of the fixture. This whole thing is above the ceiling, and then a home run. Here's an example of a decorative fixture, and there is no indication of how this thing is hung on the ceiling. And this is actually from the manufacturer, so I guess you're on your own for coming up with a hook. But the wire basically goes from the socket, and you see how they've left space for the socket, and they've even got like a little switch indicated. Then the wire basically snakes up around the chain and then goes through a hole in the ceiling. Presumably that hole is covered by an escutcheon. Again, they're not showing us this in the manufacturer's detail. Probably they want you to be on the hook for figuring out where that escutcheon is. Switching. Well, there's a switch. Obviously, there's only a few places you can put the switch unless you use the clapper. It's going to have to be either on the luminaire or remotely switched, like from a wall switch, or it can be from a remotely located dimming system. So, and there are so many different kinds of switches. In fact, one year we had a student do this. She took apart a silcock and removed all the guts and then made it into a light switch. It was very impressive, really. So anyway, there's press switches and pull switches and toggle switches and chain switches. And so again, if you're designing just a custom, bedside lamp, then you can use these types of switches. Junction boxes also have dimension. So if you are designing a recessed light, these are known dimensions here. Just that's how big a junction box is. That's what you draw. It's pretty straightforward. So that is it. What I'd like you to do first is come up with some sketches. Again, these may be from a past project, but you may also want to start from scratch. It's entirely up to you, but you are going to have to create some context for your fixture, so keep that in mind as you ponder where to do your lighting design. And by all means, if you're uncertain or you want some ideas, feel free to run them by me.